Do you remember former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev? Remember, he would be president while Putin would be prime minister, and then Putin would be president while this guy would be prime minister. Medvedev is kind of like a fucked up Mike Pence where it concerns Donald Trump. But he said the other day, well, he warned that the U.S.-backed effort to investigate war crimes that are being perpetrated by these demons, the Russian forces in Ukraine, he said any effort to investigate war crimes would mean that Americans could face retribution for our hypocrisy in the form of thermonuclear annihilation. How about that? Now, the hypocrisy, yeah, I certainly can understand that. I've talked about this when Russia invaded Ukraine, and so many people in the United States got their bloomers in a wad, as well we should have. I mean, it's the worst war crime a nation can commit, is the unprovoked invasion of another country and the slaughter of civilians, which we have done, which the Nazis did, which the Chinese have done. Just go right down the list. The Russians have done it a number of times. And Medvedev said this, quote, "The idea of punishing a country with the largest nuclear potential, that would be Russia, is absurd and potentially creates the threat to mankind's existence." He wrote on his, end quote, he wrote on his Telegram channel, quote, "The United States and their useless mongrels should remember the words of Scripture. Quote, judge not, lest you be judged, so that one day the great day of God's wrath will not come to their house, end quote. Now, you see what this fucker is doing. He's doing exactly what the Christian terrorists are doing in this country. Commingling these fucked up religions and fascism. So it's not just here. Medvedev accused the United States of sowing, quote, chaos and destruction across the world for the sake of its so-called true democracy. He added this: all American history, from the time of the conquest of the Indians, is a bloody war of annihilation. And we are talking about the most brutal extermination of the civilian population. It has become a signature style of American politics, whoever is in power there. During World War II, the United States destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki in this way, end quote. He went on, quote, Vietnam and Korea, Yugoslavia and Iraq, Cuba, Afghanistan and Syria are well aware of how disastrous the consequences of such invasions are. The list is long and constantly updated. The number of victims of the criminal policy of the United States today is comparable to the victims of the Nazi regime, end quote. And then he referred to the U.S. government's rather complicated support for investigating these Russian war crimes in Ukraine. Medvedev asked, quote, so who's going to give us a show trial? Those who kill people and commit war crimes with impunity, but do not meet real condemnation in the internal structures financed by them? Those who so firmly believed in their exclusivity and impunity? Those who believe they have the right to judge others but be beyond the jurisdiction of any court? With Russia, this will not work. Russians understand this very well. Therefore, the filthy dogs of war, stop with your disgusting bark. God damn. As I closed out the podcast, I was talking about the threat from Dmitry Medvedev, one of Trump's butt boys, about the use of nuclear war. against any country that might decide to investigate war crimes committed by the Russians. Well, there was a scientific study published a couple of days ago, another one, and this one revealed that a nuclear exchange involving as few as a couple of hundred warheads would likely cause what they're calling, quote, a little ice age, end quote, that could last centuries or even millennia. Now, again, keep in mind what the James Webb Telescope is discovering out there on the edge of creation. But here we are. The scientific consensus is it doesn't matter who's bombing whom. Once the smoke is released into the upper atmosphere, the smoke caused by that kind of exchange, it affects everybody. It spreads globally. And scientists have long known, if you go back to the book Nuclear Winter, by The Fate of the Earth by Jonathan Schell, talks about nuclear winter. And scientists have long known that even a limited thermonuclear war could result in a so-called nuclear winter, or prolonged global cooling that results from atmospheric soot blocking sunlight. And without sunlight, nothing lives. You know that. However, and this is where it gets dodgy for me, this new study examines the effects of such warfare on the Earth's oceans and marine ecosystems. Here's the deal. Researchers simulated two hypothetical nuclear wars. The first one, a U.S.-Russia thermonuclear exchange in which 4,100 kiloton warheads were launched against cities and industrial targets, ours and theirs, sparking fires that spewed more than 330 billion pounds of smoke and black carbon into the Earth's upper atmosphere, which would block most of the sunlight. And they also did an India-Pakistan conflict. They're both nuclear armed, involving just 500 100 kiloton bombs that produced up to 103 billion pounds of smoke. Now, in all of these researchers' simulations, the nuclear firestorms that spewed soot and smoke into the upper atmosphere, blocking out the sun and resulting in global crop failure, had a catastrophic effect, as you can imagine. In the first month after such a war, either one, it said the average global temperature plunged by about 13 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a larger temperature change than during the last ice age. And a Louisiana State University professor, the study's lead author, said, quote, "It doesn't matter who's bombing whom. It can be India and Pakistan or NATO and Russia. Once the smoke is released into the upper atmosphere, it spreads globally and affects everyone," end quote. Now, the researchers also found that ocean temperatures would quickly and irreversibly plummet, with spreading sea ice causing catastrophic coastal blockages that would make shipping impossible. And much of the world wouldn't be able to get into ports. And then, in an even more ominous development, the report said, quote, "The sudden drop in light and ocean temperatures, especially from the Arctic to the North Atlantic and North Pacific Oceans, that drop would kill the marine algae, which is the foundation of the marine food web, essentially creating a famine in the ocean. This would halt all fishing and aquaculture," end quote. Now, the study's co-author, a professor at Rutgers, said, quote, "Nuclear warfare results in dire consequences for everyone." He added this, quote, "World leaders have used our studies previously as an impetus to end the nuclear arms race in the 1980s, and 5 years ago to pass a treaty in the United Nations to ban nuclear weapons. We hope that this new study will encourage more nations to ratify that treaty. Now, the treaty, if you remember, was the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And it's been ratified by 65 nations, but none, not one, of the world's 9 nuclear powers have ratified it. How about that? And after last month's first meeting of state parties to this treaty in Vienna, disarmament campaigner Alice Slater said that, quote, "The dark clouds of war and strife continue to plague the world. We are enduring continued violence in Ukraine, new nuclear threats issued by Russia, including a possibility of sharing nuclear weapons with Belarus, in the context of tens of billions of dollars in armaments being poured into Ukraine by the U.S., and a brutal and careless rush to expand the boundaries of NATO to include Finland and Sweden." End quote. I get very discouraged at times, don't you? I know you've heard me say that a million times. But just the mere thought of a thermonuclear exchange, to me, it just gives me the willies, the cold shakes, the shivers. Scares the hell out of me, frankly. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcast. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.